You are what you consume. What if some of the thoughts running through your head every day aren't actually thoughts you consciously chose? Maybe they're song lyrics, lines from movies, relationship dynamics you watched as a child, things you heard so many times that they became part of the background noise of your mind. We've all heard the phrase, you are what you eat, and your mind has a diet too. And lately I've been thinking about how mindful I actually am about what I allow into mine. Because we're constantly consuming something. Music in the grocery store, television playing in the background, TikToks, Reels, podcasts, news, the people we follow, the conversations we participate in. And some of these things become so familiar that we stop noticing what they're actually saying. By now, I think a lot of millennials have looked back at Disney movies with horror and other things we used to consume as children and thought, wait, what? That was the message? Sometimes I rewatch things that were core pieces of my childhood and realize how differently they land now. Even something as seemingly innocent as Friends. It's still one of my favorite shows. It makes me laugh every single time. And yet, looking back, the infamous Ross and Rachel storyline had a profound imprint on my little developing brain about what romantic love looked like. The longing, the jealousy, the breaking apart, the getting back together, the uncertainty, the drama, normalizing casual hookups before marriage. And don't even get me started on Beauty and the Beast. That was the movie for me. I had the audiobook. I listened to it over and over and over again as a young, impressionable little soul. And now I can look back with adult eyes and think, oh, interesting. Obviously, repeatedly consuming the story of a woman loving a troubled, frightening, emotionally unavailable beast until love transforms him wasn't completely irrelevant to my developing ideas about romance. Side tangent. Eric Godsey, a spiritual podcaster whose work I've listened to, used to ask his guests a question I found fascinating. What was the story you most wanted to hear as a child? And then he would ask them to retell it almost as though they were telling a bedtime story. His philosophy was that the stories we become mysteriously enchanted by before we can intellectually explain why may reveal something about our dharma, some deeper pattern, lesson, or purpose our lives are asking us to explore. And when I look at Beauty and the Beast through that lens, it becomes much more interesting to me. Little me wasn't simply learning that love means finding a wounded, emotionally unavailable beast and loving him hard enough that he transforms. Maybe I was captivated by the deeper archetype, the possibility that what initially appears frightening, broken, or unlovable can contain something sacred underneath. Belle enters the darkness and becomes curious about it. She looks beyond appearances. She discovers the humanity hidden inside the monster. And maybe some part of my own path has always wanted to understand the shadowy, complicated parts of human nature, rather than simply condemning them. Collecting knowledge about why people become who they become. Searching psychology, spirituality, relationships, and consciousness for the humanity underneath our defenses, and trying to cultivate compassion for the parts of ourselves and others that are easiest to reject. Of course, there's another side to this. Children absorb stories long before they have the ability to critically examine the messages inside them. So maybe the stories we love can reveal something about us and quietly shape us at the same time. Then there's music. The other day I was at work and the song Beautiful Girls by Sean Kingston came on. And suddenly I was actively paying attention to what was being repeated. And I thought, wow, this is literal poison. I'll post the lyrics up on the screen here briefly, but here's an incredibly catchy, nostalgic song repeatedly associating beautiful women and romantic loss with suicide, which unfortunately has been relatable at certain points in my life. But perhaps that's exactly why I don't need it playing 12 times in my mind while I'm just sitting at work. And yet everybody's just casually going about their day, buying groceries, working, singing along. You don't even have to consciously choose the music you're consuming. You can walk into a grocery store and suddenly Mr. Brightside by the Killers is playing. And don't get me wrong, it's catchy. We all listen to it on repeat. I would probably instinctively sing along. But have you ever actually slowed down and looked at the story you're singing? Jealousy, betrayal, obsessive imagery, paranoia, emotional torment. And then we have to ask ourselves, are these the affirmations that we want playing repeatedly into our subconscious? Absolutely not. And I'm not saying that hearing Mr. Brightside at Safeway once is going to manifest a cheating scandal by Tuesday. I don't think we need to become terrified of music or start policing every thought that enters our minds. Sometimes a devastating breakup song when you're hurting is exactly what you need in that moment. It makes you feel seen. There's something incredibly healing about hearing another human being be able to articulate the thing that you couldn't articulate yourself. For example, Louis Capaldi really knows how to wreck me every time, and sometimes I want that, but I also have to be careful how often I return there if that's no longer the version of myself that I want to keep rehearsing. I think there's a difference between visiting an emotion through art and unconsciously making it your emotional home. Our brains learn through repetition and association. The things we repeatedly give our attention to can influence what feels familiar, what comes easily to our mind, and the stories through which we interpret our own experiences. So maybe the question isn't, is this song bad? Maybe it's, what am I repeatedly rehearsing when I consume this? I learned this lesson with television too. I remember when I was watching The Walking Dead. I became incredibly emotionally invested, and some of it genuinely traumatized me. I would be sitting there watching these horrific, graphic things happen to characters I cared about and experiencing all the emotions along with them. And eventually something clicked. I thought, life is exponentially hard enough. Why am I voluntarily torturing myself like this for leisure? Why am I lying safely on my couch, deliberately putting my nervous system through an apocalypse? So I made a vow to myself and pretty much stopped watching all television and movies for a long time because of that. I'm still hesitant about what I watch because I realize I'm quite sensitive to the emotional tone of what I consume. And once I started paying attention, I noticed the opposite effect too. I noticed how different I felt when I deliberately consumed things that gave me hope. What some people call having a positive mental diet. Manifestation success stories, Jesus testimonies, stories about people transforming their lives, reminders that we have some choice in how we perceive and respond to our reality, conversations about growth, consciousness, spirituality, and remembering who we are beneath all of the distortion. Things that remind me thriving is possible. Because those things don't just make me feel good for 20 minutes, sometimes they make me want to do something, try again, create something, take better care of myself, believe in another possibility long enough to actually move toward it. And I think that's an important distinction. Because mindful consumption isn't about only consuming things that are happy, that's spiritual bypassing. Art is supposed to explore grief and darkness and heartbreak and the entire strange spectrum of being human. I don't want to live inside some sterile positivity bubble where every song has to sound like an affirmation track. We just need discernment, conscious choice. I want to be able to experience darkness in art without unconsciously deciding that darkness is the nature of reality. And this goes much further than music and television. If your feed is constantly showing you relationship horror stories, eventually dating can start to look hopeless. If you're consuming hundreds of images of extraordinarily beautiful people, filtered, posed, edited, surgically enhanced, and perfectly lit, and then comparing all of that to yourself standing in fluorescent bathroom lighting, your reference point for normal can quietly become distorted. And suddenly you're criticizing a body or face you might have thought was beautiful if you hadn't spent hours consuming everybody else's highlight reel. So we need to view our attention the same way we view nutrition. Some things nourish us, some things are delicious but probably shouldn't constitute 90% of our diet. Some things are fine occasionally, and some things consistently leave us feeling terrible. And maybe the most important thing to notice is how all of it makes us feel, because the emotional states we repeatedly return to can start to feel like who we are. So I think one of the most useful questions we can ask ourselves is, who do I become after consuming this? Not just did I enjoy it, but who am I afterward? Do I feel more creative, more hopeful, more curious, more connected to humanity? Do I want to dance, create something, go outside, call somebody I love? Or do I suddenly feel ugly, behind, angry, suspicious, hopeless about the future, obsessed with somebody else's life? Because your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. And there is an entire world competing for it. So we must become a little more protective of that attention. Make playlists that sound like the life you actually want to inhabit. Watch stories that remind you humans can be magnificent. Follow people who make you want to participate in your own life rather than escape from it. Seek perspectives that expand your sense of possibility instead of endlessly confirm our deepest fears. And every once in a while, audit your mental diet. Look at your Spotify, your YouTube history, the accounts you follow, the shows you're binging, the conversations you keep having, and ask, what have I been feeding my mind? Your mind is the one home you will inhabit for your entire life. So if I get any say what echoes through mine, I want to choose carefully. I want to feed it stories of extraordinary love, of people overcoming impossible things, of beauty and humor and redemption, of people finding meaning after loss, of human beings remembering that their lives can change in a moment. Not because darkness isn't real. I've seen enough darkness to know it doesn't need any help convincing me that it's there. I want to become equally fluent in possibility. So maybe you are what you consume isn't quite right, but it's what you consume becomes part of the language your mind learns to speak. And if that's true, I want to pay attention to the stories I'm teaching mine, because the world will feed your mind all day long. The question is, what do you believe is possible? Thank you for being here. I hope you have a nourishing day. Bless you. What is going on? Okay. What was the story? Oh my god.